Coffee turned to cold sludge beside him. He didn't shave, didn't sleep. Each failure felt like the war itself, loud, senseless, endless. The engine groaned, the gauge needles quivered, and then another freeze. He slammed his fist against the table, tools rattled. Something inside him broke a little more. For the first time, he thought of giving up. That night, the airfield was silent. Snow had begun to fall, thick and heavy, muting the world. Mallory sat alone in the small mess hall, the only light a weak bulb above his table. He unbuttoned his collar, rubbed his eyes, and reached for the kettle. The water inside had cooled, so he set it back on the small stove. He watched as it began to tremble, a soft hiss building into a whistle. Steam poured out, curling through the dim light. He leaned closer. The condensation gathered along the metal lid, droplets forming, running, evaporating. Something about it stopped him. The movement, the warmth flowing through metal, transforming water into vapor. It was simple, yet perfect. He opened his notebook and wrote one word, vapor. Outside, the night was still. The snow kept falling. The sound of distant engines echoed faintly over the hills, bombers heading out again into the dark. Mallory closed his eyes. The image of the kettle lingered. The hiss of steam merged with the sound of those engines fading into the distance. He didn't know it yet, but the idea had already begun forming fragile, hidden alive. The seed of something extraordinary, born not from brilliance, but from exhaustion. Approx. 3 zeros. 00 words voiceover. Eddie cinematic prose the following morning. The airfield lay under a crust of white. The wind had carved lines across the snow, curling it against hangar doors and broken crates. A strange calm had settled, the kind that often came before bad news. Mallory arrived early, before anyone else. The air bit into his lungs as he walked across the tarmac. His boots crunched in rhythm with his thoughts, steady, cold, relentless. He unlocked the hangar and stepped inside. The smell of oil and iron wrapped around him like a familiar ghost. Everything was as he'd left it. The burnt engine block, the scribbled notes, the lamp hanging crooked over his workbench, and on the table, still where he'd written it, was the word vapor. He ran his thumb over the smudge of pencil. A small word, but it felt heavier than anything he'd written before. All morning he couldn't shake it. The thought of that kettle, the hiss, the warmth travelling through thin metal, keeping the water alive. He replayed it over and over in his mind, steam turning to condensation, condensation returning to steam, a cycle of life inside heat and metal. He pulled the carburetor diagram closer and stared at the narrow throat where the ice always formed. The cold wasn't the true enemy, stagnation was. The air moved too quickly, the pressure dropped, the temperature fell, and moisture froze in seconds. But what if, he wondered, he could keep that small passage warm? Not by brute force, not by electricity or open flame, but by the engine's own breath. He could almost hear the kettle whistling in his mind. By midday, the hangar filled with life again, footsteps, laughter, the sound of wrenches striking metal.